love the chatter, and that's what this is definitely all about. And we encourage much chatter and many questions. Welcome to this evening's talk on Seattle's tree and climate emergency and what we all can do about it. I do want to give a special thanks and shout out to Cascadia Climate Action for helping to organize this event. Mary, who's in the yellow jacket. Hi, Mary. Wave, please. Mary's got question cards. So the way that we're going to do questions is just grab a question card so that you can write it down, and we'll either call you up or we'll read your question. So just an FYI on the question cards that are going to be at the Cascadia Climate Action table. There's tons more info at that table. There are handouts and cards and different little things. So please stop by there. This is very casual and meant to be community-oriented and participatory. So please, if you feel so called to, just stand up and shout out, and that's totally all good. We have some incredible speakers tonight. We're going to actually start off with, by the way, I'm Susan. My name is Susan Sue. I am with Tree Action Seattle. And my day job is actually in investing in solutions to climate change, which is a really exciting and sometimes frustrating, but mostly exciting job. And I'm really excited to actually welcome our very first speaker, Weston Brinkley. Yay, Weston. And I'm going to let Weston introduce himself and take us through some of his great slides that he has set up here, and then we will move on with the rest of our program. Thank you.
Hello. Everyone hear me? I did not know I was going first. Thanks for having me. My name is Weston Brinkley, and I should be talking louder. I'm going to try to talk louder. Okay. Let's see. My name is Weston. I spent 6 years on the Seattle Urban Forestry Commission. I was chair for 4 years. I teach urban environmental studies at Antioch University. I've taught natural history. I've taught environmental perspectives. My day job is I work in the Green Duwamish watershed, helping connect communities to nature. And I was asked today to talk about how we got here. And by here, I think we mean Seattle's tree and climate emergency. And I took that somewhat broadly, so I'm going to start us off with some pretty deep context of how we got here. And that's to have us look at this chart, and hopefully charts are fun and not boring to you. This is some tree and plant species there along the top, charted against time. And it's looking into Puget Sound's deep history. What I would say is, when you have a different climate, you have different nature. And I think this is a good example of that. 20,000 years ago, we had a different climate in the Puget Sound, and we had a vastly different set of tree species, and we had a forest, and we had a natural landscape that looked dramatically different. If we're headed towards a climate that looks different, we need to kind of anticipate that maybe what we think of as our forest might not actually work. What I will point out is that Douglas fir and western red cedar were completely absent from Puget Sound 20,000 years ago till about 10,000 years ago. And that's going to be, I think, one of the telling things we should be talking about. So what did we look like 20,000 years ago? Well, that's the image on the left, right? Puget Sound was a freshwater lake. This is prior to the last glaciation, okay? there were no western red cedars. There were not the forests we imagined 20,000 years ago. It was grasslands and various other forest types, and we were in the middle of glaciation, which is where we see then just 3,000 years later, we see ice covering our landscape and removing all forests. And this is something that happened over and over and over again. It happened for the last time 17 to 15,000 years ago. This is also the time that we think the first people arrived in Puget Sound. From archaeological evidence, from oral tradition, from tribes, it is likely that people were here roughly 17 to 15,000 years ago, exploring around and doing what they could in this landscape. Now, when the ice recedes, people were there. We have strong evidence that people were in the Puget Sound prior to Douglas fir, prior to western red cedar. Our relationship with forests is complete. We have been a part of those landscapes as a species. We need to find ways to coexist with trees, and we have been in this region our whole existence. 3,000 years ago is a time point I'll point to because it feels normal, but it's not. You can notice, for instance, Puget Sound extends all the way into the Kent Valley. The landscape was dramatically different. Things that we think of as forests weren't forests. Things that we think of as fields weren't fields. Lakes, water, all of that was dramatically changing. The Pacific Northwest is a very new landscape when it comes to geology, when it comes to forests and nature. It's changing dramatically. And this is a good representation of that. This is a really fun animation. You should all check it out. It's Burke Museum presentation. Some folks may have seen this. This is Water Lines. It's a project to recreate a pre-colonial Seattle landscape. It documents the locations of indigenous peoples. That's what these houses and dots mean. And it also attempts to provide our best guess at what the natural landscape looked like. This work was really revolutionary, kind of saying, wow, this was Seattle. This maybe could be Seattle. Maybe this should be Seattle. And it's also, I think, important for folks to realize that this is now becoming a little more contentious because this represents Seattle in 1840 when it was pre-colonial, but it was also post-genocidal. This represents the decimation of indigenous peoples that had been dying from disease for over 200 years at this point. And what colonialists saw as untouched landscape was actually, in many ways, a landscape that was rebounding from the death, in some cases, they think up to 90% of the indigenous population. So what we're not seeing on this map is how the first peoples of Puget Sound used the landscape. We're not seeing representation of burning. We're not seeing representation of camas fields. We're not seeing representation of how this landscape might have been used by peoples who we know used them for hundreds and thousands of years. So we have all these various pathways that we can follow threads to get us to where we are today. And I think this is typically where we think of when we think of how did we get here, where did we start from, right? We think of the logging that took place all throughout Puget Sound. And Puget Sound was logged dramatically. George Vancouver famously said that Elliott Bay had the greatest trees of any place he'd seen, so they immediately cut them down. And I think it's no coincidence that that's where Seattle is, right? Where we grew from where we are because of those natural resources that were exploited. And I think very quickly, right, we have images like this one that folks may be familiar with, this woman here in Ravenna Park, right? We lost the trees and then very quickly came to realize that there was some fault there. At one time, it's thought that Ravenna Park was home to the largest Doug fir in the state of Washington. And it was cut down in the 1920s in night. Okay. Seattle was dramatically logged, and that's not unique. I say Seattle because that's what we're talking about today, but that is the region. That is a very common experience. Here's two photos from the 1936 King County aerial to give us an idea of what that might have looked like. And the one on the left is South Park, one of the communities that's really being focused on right now due to the loss of tree cover. And one thing I'll point out is that where it's not developed, it's farmland, right? The logging and the development were separate. The landscape was logged completely, and only later did development come. The conflict we're seeing now between tree loss and development is much more immediate. Development in this time period was into farms and fields. So by 1936, you can see South Park in the top of that upper left image is pretty developed, and it is where the trees are, right? It was only through the addition of houses that we got trees and street trees and parks into what had been this completely logged and converted to fields and farms in some cases. And so again, that's a much different history than I think we're used to. The image on the right is where we are today. This is 15th, so right up here. Just to give you a sense of what this landscape looked like in 36. I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's not a lot of trees. There's no street trees. I think that's one thing that really jumps out. The public effort just wasn't there for trees in any way. And it's something that really took years and decades to develop, and that understanding of what was lost. And some of that was the city stopped being surrounded by forests, right? When this destruction happened to what's now the suburbs, and when this destruction happened to what's now the Cascade foothills, it was a much bigger impact because it wasn't just Seattle that had been logged, it was now everything. So you get a kind of a base point of like, this is what we were dealing with, right? This is the low point of where we're having to grow back from. Next slide, please. Oh, here's another one. This is Central District in 61. Zoom in, is that? I don't know if you can. Again, my apologies if you can't see, but I will say that street trees are pretty absent. And in a lot of the properties, you can go house to house to house to house before you finally find a tree. And I think the state of, again, where we came from was pretty poor, and it's a good reminder to realize that we have grown a lot of canopy in a relatively short period of time previously. And I'm probably going to be an optimist in this crisis, but I think we can do it again. And we've got experience, right? 36 to 61, 61 to now, those weren't no growth periods. Those were huge growth periods. And we were able to add trees, so I think if we get it right, we can keep it up. This I'll blow through, but essentially, we're getting into some numbers here. This work was done to try to figure out what might historical canopies have been, and they looked at various estimates, and that's those numbers there on the left. there was 15 and then a 40% estimate, which didn't use as good of a method. 10, 10, 18, 22, 25, 26, 29, 26, 28. Not great analysis, but there is some sense that we were growing canopy from the 70s through the 2000s. And I think this is most of our experience, right? We kind of got that sense that we were growing canopy in that time period. And it was also a time period where Seattle wasn't growing, right? Seattle, in fact, it was the only point in Seattle's history where Seattle wasn't growing. That's another way to put it. Seattle was booming in population growth through almost all of its history up until that time period. So I think that, again, gives us this scenario where we see how to grow and how to grow our canopy being at odds with one another. I think that's really what we're going to be talking about tonight. And then I added on the most recent canopy cover data there, the 28.6 and 16, and our current best guess of 28.1. And then, something else I'll say is we've been working at this a long time, and I know just a few of the faces out there represent a lot of the effort of folks who have been thinking about these issues long before we were calling them a crisis, long before we were connecting climate to our canopy crisis or even our canopy. And some of these are the more official efforts of things that have been happening more recently. And I was involved in these later two. Kathy, I think you probably worked on both those earlier ones. But it hasn't been a recent effort. It's a long-term effort that's been going for a while with some fits and starts. And sometimes I like to go back and look at the 2007 plan. I was telling Steve earlier, I looked at the 2007 plan, and some of the pipe dreams in there were things that we have now. And it's tough to remember that when you're experiencing the trauma of tree loss, to know that, well, we have made some progress, but it's not good enough yet. So that's my little bit of optimism and way too much context, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Weston. That was fascinating. I didn't expect that. I saw these slides beforehand, and I didn't really know how to interpret them, but that was the most incredible voiceover, and I love the optimism. Even when things seem at their worst, they're actually way better. I would much rather live here and now than in the Mongol Empire, let's just say, or other places. With that, I would love to welcome Professor Kathy Wolf from the University of Washington. The esteemed Professor Wolf. I will cue up your slides in one moment, and come on up and give your intro, and I'll get your slides going.
Good evening, everyone. How are y'all doing? Good beer, huh? Yeah. I love this turnout. It's, a very damp evening after yesterday. It was beautiful, but here you all are, and I really appreciate that. I'm now semi-retired, but I've been working at the University of Washington for decades, and my research and teaching has been about the human dimensions of trees and nature in cities, nearby nature. We have some of the most splendid outdoor spaces, the Olympics, the coast, Mount Rainier, and so on. And yet, what I'm going to talk about is why we need trees in our neighborhoods, in our city, in our communities. Because those peak experiences, they're part of our identity. They're part of what we are. But we need the nature around us. And last week, I was at the World Forum on Urban Forestry. And Weston projected a mood or a tone of optimism. The optimism at this meeting, people from all over the world that are doing incredible things in their respective towns, cities, and nations. And, you know, trees are about hope. If you plant a tree, you're hopeful. We know the survival rate, well, whatever. But we have that intention. And so, please, next. What I'd like to share with you in just a few minutes is a very quick overview. Most of you know far more than I do about how, the how of policy, the how of planting programs, the how of tree management. What I talk about is why. Why do we need trees in our communities? And before I forget, and I'll stop waving around these documents, there's a few copies on the table back there, but one is Nature. These are both from the Nature Conservancy. They were published there and available as PDFs. One is Nature's Riches, and it translates what I'll talk about here, the evidence of trees and nature and health, to some economic terms. The other out there is Outside Our Doors. Again, nearby nature, the importance of immediately being able to step out of our home, our business, our school, and encounter these sorts of things. And one last pitch. If I can get this open, it's sticky because of the rain. There is an urban forestry symposium at the University of Washington on November 2nd. With an emphasis on a theme of indigenous peoples and our potential partnership, as Weston alluded to. So let me start with why. Because they're good for us in so many ways. And you know this. You feel this intuitively, but I want to recount some of the evidence. And nearly 40 years of research has been exploring this relationship, this connection to nearby nature. Thousands of studies from all over the world. And we had a recounting of some of the most recent research at this World Forum last week. But very quickly, and I know maybe no more than the first two tables can see this slide, but let me run through it. On the left there, the different types of nature exposure, wildness, of course, but engineer nature, bioswales, rain gardens. Think of all of these places that we build and develop as potential small or micro parks that can influence health. Built environments, of course, and then any sort of blend of design, engineering, construction. What are the various responses? Well, sounds, views, sun, vitamin D, ecodiversity, microbiodiversity. We're understanding the uptake, particularly of children, and how that influences the microbiome, and with important implications for their immune systems, not only when they're small, but potentially through their life cycle. Physical and mental states. So as we proceed here, we're seeing more and more of how we respond to these nature encounters. And we're often not conscious of this. Sometimes these reactions, as determined in labs and different experimental situations, they happen very quickly, and we're not necessarily conscious of it. But nonetheless, physical and mental states, more relaxation, better immune function, more healing, less stress, less adrenaline, less cortisol, which is an indicator, a bioindicator of stress. Improved behaviors. People are more likely to be physically active if there are green spaces, places that are compatible to be out, moving about, walking, cycling, and so on. Better mental focus. Important for schools, businesses, places where people have to think, calculate, pay attention, all of that. And finally, over on the far right, the health outcomes. Kind of the term that public health officials use is morbidity, reduced morbidity, cardiovascular disease, reduced COVID infections, reduced ADHD, and so on and so forth. And these sorts of benefits, when I started doing this research and collaborating with people in different places, we would publish these results and people would say, wow, well, really? We now have, again, thousands of articles, thousands of studies that have been done to generate the evidence support of these various outcomes. And an article, if you wish to pull this down, it's available on the web, no cost. It's open source or open access. And we specifically, a team of us, did a review of the articles that focus on trees, city trees. And there's some great things in there. I can't possibly go into all the detail, but you'll see similarities to what I said about the more general or broader research about nearby nature and health. Next, please. And what we see across these articles and across this research is a wide variety of situations, tree and nature situations. So it may be more wild, it may be more engineered, it may be more constructed. The architect that is developing these vertical forests, he's doing this work in Italy, and it's now happening in China, it's happening in Northern Europe. He puts up these ideas and occasionally a structure, and people look at them and go, wow, really, we can do that. So there's sort of creativity markers that he's dropping in cities all around the world. But it comes right down to green schoolyards as well, places where kids can hang out, outdoor classrooms, get a break from the classroom, including some schools are now pulling natural materials into the classrooms for an ongoing experience. Another way to look at this, something that people seem to connect to and understand as a concept, is the nature pyramid. And what we're looking at here is at the base, the scale is neighborhood, and by virtue of that, greater frequency and duration of nature experience. Ongoing up the pyramid on the left, regional, national, international experiences and trips. And then on the right is that frequency, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, and so on. And I'm guessing this crew, you enjoy nature travel. I have a daughter who's a wilderness guide in Alaska. The experiences that we've had as she takes us out to look at bears and glaciers and all sorts of things, peak experiences. But this is what counts down here every day. Frequent experiences of trees, gardens, and parks. All right, so how do we translate this to policy? And again, some of you know far more about this and you've been working on it for a very long time. But Cecil Konindijk is an urban forestry scholar based in Northern Europe, and he is now sharing this with planners, and that is 330, 300. Say it after me. 330, 300. What does that mean? Everyone can see 3 trees from their home. Every community or residential community has 30% canopy. Everyone is within 300 meters or 300 yards of a green space, a park, and open space. And Cecil has been publishing about this, talking about this. It's a quick uptake. It's something you can share with a planner or a policy person and say, yeah, it's ambitious, but hey, why not? Let's talk about it. Let's see what we can do. Next, please. And then another idea is to be more intentional where we plant trees for health and for climate. So we can put out trees wherever there are plantable spaces, but what we're seeing in this research is a little more intention can help us to boost those health benefits even more. So views from within, that really connects to Cecil's 3 trees idea. creating refuge. So yes, having trees in our cities might cool things in the summer when we're having that peak heat. But if we create small groves, thermal refuges, places where people can be outside, where it's cooler, where the air is more humid and more comfortable. We can't stay indoors in air conditioning for days or weeks on end, so thermal refuge is one idea. This article again, Greening Blocks. Sarah Barron is the lead author, open access, if you'd like to download that and take a look. Next, please. I'll end this with, of course, save the big trees. And what I was told some time ago, the very brief history of Seattle is log off, log on. Log off apparently has not ended. Yet, Weston shared with us a historic trajectory of canopy increase. We can maintain that, perhaps grow it more. That's what you are all interested in. I was recently introduced to a book about elder flora. Flora meaning plants, elder, of course, we know what that means. Let's campaign for preservation, conservation of our elder flora. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm going to see how far this stretches. And while I get the next deck set up, I just want to share, I love the views from within concept. Just yesterday, today's Tuesday, right? Yeah, so yesterday we had our Monday partner meeting at which our funder for my fund attended. He's a multi-billionaire, and he was on Zoom with us. And he was sitting in one of his mansions, and he was in front of the window, and somebody commented like, "Oh, we love your view, you have so many trees." And he said, "Oh yeah, Susan, it's almost as if I'm in Seattle." And I just wanted to share that because here in Seattle, you can be an apartment dweller or you can live in one of these little teeny single-family residences up in Greenwood or wherever, and you can have the same view that my billionaire boss has and is proud to say it's almost as good as Seattle. That's what he said. So I think it's very special, and in another way, though, it does make us, in some ways, take it for granted because we are so blessed, as Weston shared, and even though we keep cutting it down, it keeps coming back. But we're going to hear a little bit more about what we all are doing about that now. So on to our last presentation, and thank you, everybody, for your great patience throughout all of this cool content. I am going to hand it off to Sandy Shetler. Yeah. Oh, do you want me to do this part? I can do this part. Okay, I can easily do this part. So we're going to talk, and a lot of folks here are very intimately familiar with Tree Action Seattle. I see Megan, for example. She is she doesn't want me to say spiritual leader, but I'm just going to embarrass her and say it. She's pretending to just be she's our little plant in the audience. Jessica, I mean, so many great folks. So I can't name everybody because then I'll end up saying everybody's name who's here. So thank you so much for being here. But I don't know if everybody has seen this presentation. We know this. We just heard Weston and Kathy talk all about how good trees are. We know this. They do all these great things for us. We know that mature trees are even better. Interestingly, which I don't think everybody knows, there has been actual analysis to show that mature trees are actually doing more work. There's this fallacy that baby trees, kind of like teenagers, eat more. You know, it's when you're like, oh, now I'm 30 or now I'm 40 and I can't just eat donuts for breakfast anymore because I don't have the same metabolism. So we have this idea that trees are the same, but it's not the case, actually. Big trees metabolize more CO2 than little trees because they're bigger. And they have more surface area to absorb that CO2, and they have more trunks, and they just have more mass. So they're constantly turning carbon into mass at even higher rates up to a certain age, which is like the 100-year range. So it's not very young anyway. So we are very excited about mature trees. It's great to plant trees, afforestation for the win, but also it makes no sense to be cutting down our very, very lovely mature trees. This is data compiled by the volunteer community behind Tree Action Seattle. This data, I don't know if people can see the numbers here, but this data represents not the totality of tree removals for the month of July or by neighborhood or to date, but merely the numerator atop an unknown denominator. And that's because this is a count of the tree removal notices as sent through SDCI. This is not a representation of all lawful removals because anybody can just go ahead and print off a notice. It doesn't have to be allowable or anything. Nobody checks that. But the dirty little secret behind all of this is that there's an enormous amount of removals. We don't really know how many, but anecdotally, everybody here has experienced it. An enormous amount that are that are done without any notice, in the dark of night, so to speak. So that's why I say we have an unknown denominator here. To date, and this is actually, we need to update this because it's almost the end of the month, but this is current to October 1st. We had 1,705 reported removals in the city of Seattle, as well as, again, countless unreported removals, of which nearly 200 were large trees of over 24 inches in diameter. Under the new tree ordinance, that would be considered our tier 2 trees. Under the former parlance, it would have mostly have been exceptional trees. Exceptional trees are really 30 inches in diameter, blah, blah. You all know this stuff, but the numbers really speak for themselves. This is the same data mapped against a map of Seattle. The darker dots that you see represent larger trees. And this is just for 1 month. So this is not a cumulative count. Of course, the cumulative removals are going to shift across all of the different neighborhoods. And I think we would probably see quite a lot of dark dots in the south part of Seattle. This is just for one neighborhood, but you can see that really the activity of tree removal spares no part of the city. No matter how treeless it already is, it's still happening. I also want to point out that tree removals tend to correspond with what the city calls our environmental justice zones, or are areas that have historically suffered from worse environmental effects such as air pollution, urban heat islands leading to asthma and other diseases. And it's just where it's continuing to happen more and most. So, despite the fact that we went in the right direction for a while from what we saw from Weston's data that he presented from the 70s through the 2000s, we're now, once again, going in the wrong direction. Why is this? Well, I think we all know the answer here. The city of Seattle's very own canopy study showed that trees on lots under redevelopment were 20 times more likely to be cut down than trees anywhere else in the city. Oops. The tree ordinance, we call it the tree cutting ordinance, doesn't protect trees. And I have a little graphic error here, but we say that our trees are hens guarded by foxes at SDCI. And with that, I'm going to let Sandy tell us a couple of specific stories. I also want to give a super special shout out to Suzanne Grant, who is both pictured here as well as in the flesh right here.
Hi, everyone. This is like my dream, to be in a room with a bunch of people who love trees, probably as much or more than I do. So I'm Sandy Shetler, and I'm a medical social worker. And about 3 years ago, I left medical social work and essentially became a tree social worker. I'm in love with trees, and through my work with Tree Action Seattle and also Tree Pack in the last 6,000, I was blessed with being the point of contact for people in the community who were worried about trees near them. So I spend a lot of time visiting people who are worried about trees and trying to help them figure out how to save them. In the process, I've gotten very familiar with the ordinance. So we just wanted to show a few samples of tree loss in Seattle, and this is, again, probably going to be very familiar to all of you. This slide in particular is well known to most. It's the famous Queen Anne tulip tree, which is really a hallmark in the tree movement. This tree, tulip trees are the tallest deciduous tree on the continent. This tree had a 44-inch trunk, and as David shared earlier, the neighbors in this neighborhood got together because this tree was so beloved, and they all chipped in and paid an architecture firm to make a different plan for this developer's project that would give him all the houses, same size houses, even all the parking. So really a doppelganger of the development he eventually chose, but with the tree. And unfortunately, he did not choose that, and so we lost this tree. Yeah, there we go. This is my friend Kirsty, goes around West Seattle and self-prosecutes tree crimes. So she came upon this. This was a lot with 5 exceptional trees, and she came after 4 had been almost completely removed. She stopped that one as it was being taken down, and that one is still there. The other 4 are gone. But the funny thing about this one is that we submitted complaints, and 5 exceptional trees on the SDCI final notice of non-violation were 3 small trees, no violation. So, yeah, nothing for the developer except they get to build. And then finally, this is, okay, well, they're not in quite the right order, but this is a tree that we tried to save last summer called Doug the Fir that many of you might have read about. This tree was on the edge of a lot in the Maple Leaf neighborhood, and when the homeowner sold to a developer, he was told that his tree would be saved. So he was quite confident, and it was only when the plans came out that it turned out that this healthy tree on the very edge of the lot would be cut. We protested that removal, and even in this city where it's hard to get help when you're having a crime, we had 5 of the building department's top managers come out to the site, and 6 police cars with extra policemen, all to ensure that this tree could be cut down. They stayed until the tree came all the way down, and then they all left because the danger was past. So I'm quite cynical. Anyway, and then this is just sort of, I view this photo as a transition from where we used to worry about tree loss in Seattle and where we worry about it now. This is a lot that was clear cut on West Seattle on a slope, and it's public land, but it was an illegal cut for views, and I believe this one was eventually prosecuted. But it's similar, it happens all over, and it's why in Seattle we don't have any slopes that have large trees if there's water in front. They're either cut illegally or the surrounding properties have covenants which allow them to be cut. Last summer, there was, on the Alki Bluff was completely shaved by the developer at the top, and he was charged $15,000, so. Yeah, so it's part of what we want to change. Anyway, so next slide. Yeah, do you want to take this back over? Here we go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sandy, for sharing the background on those. So I think the message is very clear. We need housing and we need trees. We know why we need trees. It's obvious why we need housing. This is an aerial photograph of Seattle. This should be a familiar view to many of us. And I wanted to share it because a common thing that I hear, and I've even heard, for example, in this election cycle, is that, well, the carrying capacity of a place like Seattle is we're not anywhere near where we could be. For example, look at the great cities of the world that hold so much more population just as happily. And I wanted to share an example of one of those great cities of the world. I was in Tokyo earlier this year, ironically for a climate conference. The city of Tokyo is getting really big on climate action because they know that they need to. Because as this map on the series of maps from NASA show on the right-hand side there, Tokyo is one of the worst urban heat islands in the world. They have completely cut down all of their trees in the city of Tokyo. If anybody's ever been to Tokyo, it's a wonderful city, and who doesn't love Japan? But it's dang hot, and nobody goes there in the summer unless you really can't afford to go any other time, and you have family, and you have to go see them. And if you'll notice, the gray areas in the upper right corner correspond directly with the red areas in the lower right corner, unsurprisingly. The temperature map actually shows land surface temperature, so that is the temperature of the land to the touch. And if you'll see in the key, all the way to the darkest red, that's 60 degrees Celsius. I don't know if you can cook an egg at 60 degrees Celsius, but it wouldn't be very comfortable to walk barefoot on. And so we see that the grayest areas of Tokyo, at its very high carrying capacity, this ultra example of complete urban development, is at a land surface temperature that is untenable for humans to walk upon barefoot. And not to mention, Tokyo remains, despite all of this development, one of the least affordable cities in the world. One of the most fun to visit, I will say, but save your pennies if you want to visit or live in Tokyo. Fighting for trees is fighting for climate justice. And cutting down trees is a perpetuation of decades of inequity, which we'll see right here. This is a really cool interactive map that you can go online and find. It was put together by Esri, a GIS mapping software service, and the Science Museum of Virginia. And you can look up any city, or I don't think it's any city, but Seattle's on there. A lot of cities are mapped on here. And you can actually click on all of these different little areas of the city. So I've clicked on one here, which is the Central District. I just picked one that was in the red. And you can see that, I don't know if you all can see where it's kind of outlined. It says Madrona. It's kind of Capitol Hill in Madrona, where our friend Iskra lives. Temperatures in this neighborhood are 2.3 degrees hotter versus a citywide average. And remember, the city is hotter than our surrounding areas because we already experience an urban heat island in Seattle. We have over 50% hardscape, impervious surfaces in this neighborhood, and the tree cover is just 15% in this neighborhood. And by the way, it has one of the highest minority populations in Seattle. None of this is a coincidence. This map, in fact, is depicting the relationship between redlining and tree cover and temperature. HOLC stands for, somebody remind me, the Housing something Lending Corporation. So you can see kind of in the key there. But it's just an uncanny relationship. It's a direct linear relationship between what we've done around redlining, with what we've done to remove trees, with now what folks in these neighborhoods are experiencing. So this is why we say it's one of the most urgent climate justice issues that there is today. And this is right here in Seattle. This wonderful drawing comes courtesy of David Mooring, who may or may not be here. And I think it's a great illustration of how we can build housing and keep trees. As you can see quite plainly, the same number of units, including a detached ADU and an attached ADU and a primary residence of the same size, can be maintained with 5 times as many trees if you simply eliminate what we call lot sprawl. So everybody's anti-sprawl. It's kind of really earned a bad name over the last couple of decades, and now we want to reframe that as what's going on is lot sprawl, which is the spreading out of hard-built surfaces across a lot such that nothing else can live there on that space ever again. Once it's paved without a jackhammer, it is very hard for a tree to take root and transform that lot ever again in our lifetimes or in our children's or in our grandchildren's. So we are advocating for an end to lot sprawl and a creation of real density. We say, if you want density, here's what density looks like. And it's a beautiful thing because you can have 5 times as many trees and the same amount of housing. And by the way, we get to share some walls and save on our electric bills, which is always a good thing. This is just a couple of snapshots from a really cool project by the architect Ray Johnston and his firm, Ray Johnston Architecture, where they transformed 2 single-family residences and a nonprofit office into 82 units of housing. Wow, so just a 40 times transformation of housing there while maintaining dozens of mature trees on this lot. So when I hear Legacy Capital or other groups say, we cannot possibly preserve this one tree because we're trying to build 2 residences here, I say, look at Bryant Heights. Give me 82 units of housing. And with that, I would love to invite our collaborator, community member, and tree hugger in arms, Ryan, to come and talk a little bit about his personal story and why it's so awesome that trees are trending.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to everyone who's presented so far. It's been a great evening. As Susan mentioned, my name is Ryan. I'm part of Tree Action Seattle. And in my day job, I'm a diagnostic radiologist. I live in Seattle here in the Wedgwood neighborhood with my wife and 2 young children. I like trees. Perhaps you've heard about Luma the cedar. By a show of hands, who's heard of Luma the cedar? Great. I thought maybe that would be the case. In case you haven't heard of Luma the cedar, I'm going to give you a summary. And I'm going to start with this slide here, which is actually a picture of Luma's, the property that Luma has resided on for about 200 years. This is a single-family home in the Wedgwood neighborhood. You can see the home right in the front. It's got all these lush gardens. And Luma is in the back of this particular shot over here on the far right side of the lot. Luma's 80 feet tall. She's a western red cedar in the Wedgwood neighborhood. And she was on the news this summer because someone known as Droplet camped up in her limbs for weeks to help save her. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that Luma resides on the edge of that lot I just showed you. It was a 10,000 square foot lot, and it was a residential parcel in Seattle. It was created in the mid-1900s, where a single family home was built, which I had just shown you. And in 2022, the property was purchased by Legacy Group Capital. They're a development firm based out of Bellevue, Washington. They're not Seattleites. They're based out of Bellevue, Washington. I want to emphasize that. And they bought it in 2022 for $1.4 million with plans to redevelop the lot. The developers split this lot that you can see here. After they cleared it, they split it in half legally. So they split it into 2 rectangular, simple rectangles, 5,000 square foot lots, and claimed that Luma, as you can see here in this shot, this is Luma here. This is where the house was and all that garden. And there's all this space here and all around. It's a very large lot. And they said that Luma had to be killed and removed in order to build the number of homes that they wanted to build, which is the maximum allowable number of housing on the new 2 lots that they had just created. So the rule was you could only have 3 housing units per lot, but because they were able to split this large lot into 2, they were now able to say, well, we can fit 6 here. And so because of that, they said, well, there's no other way to do it. That tree has to go. Trust us. And SDCI said, okay. And I, like probably, I don't know, at least many of my generation, trees were not a big piece of my life. They were not a forefront issue for me. I saw the headlines that the Seattle mayor passed this new ordinance that trees would be protected beyond a certain size, XYZ. And then I had this happening in my neighborhood, and I was just, my jaw dropped. I said, well, what are you talking about? Haven't you seen the headlines? Right? I mean, Mayor Harrell protected these. And it turns out that that's just not the case. They're able to submit these plans that say trees got to go if we want to do what we want to do. And the city, as I have learned, rarely contests that. They kind of just accept that. However, their claim was proven false by expert architects, city planners, and arborists who were coming by on a regular basis to see Luma and see Droplet. And they said, look, we can get 6 housing units here in a way that preserves Luma's life. The city of Seattle, unfortunately, did not verify or independently assess the developer's assertions. Legacy's plans were approved. She was scheduled to be cut down. Fortunately for Luma and for us, Luma was beloved by her neighbors and community. And they fought back and they won. Now, this is the part, where I was so appreciative of what Kathy Wolf had to say and what we can all feel, right? We feel this connection. Why did the community step up and fight? We don't have the conversations with Luma, right? She doesn't sing me to sleep every night. She doesn't read me bedtime stories or raise my children for me, right? But we have this connection. You all feel it. That's why you live in Seattle. That's why Seattle's so special. And the community, like, seriously, you can hear my voice. Like, the community just stood up. They came out, and they said, we have to do something. Thanks to the courageous direct action by Droplet, who camped in the tree for weeks, and the involvement and advocacy of the Snoqualmie tribe, Luma is now a designated Washington State archaeological site. And this is important to understand. It's one of approximately 300 to 400 protected trees in the city of Seattle. That's it. Safeguarded from developers. Through Luma, Tree Action Seattle was born. We're troubled by the new ordinance as it allows developers to indiscriminately fell exceptional trees like Luma throughout the city. I hope that having attended tonight and after hearing everything you heard tonight, that you will sort of consider the climate and public health impacts of the new tree ordinance and what you've learned today. My hope is that after attending today's event, you at the least will feel more informed about Seattle's urban tree and climate emergency. Even better, maybe you'll feel like you're able to now empathize with our perspective that the tree advocates have, that we need to keep trees where we live. We need these mature trees for their climate benefits. We don't want to see them go, and we don't want to see the perpetuation of more and more urban heat islands all throughout the city. We need to build or grow more trees where we don't have them today. We need to keep the mature trees that we have today, and we need more denser housing, but we need to do it in a way that preserves our canopy and allows it to grow with us. And maybe best, after attending tonight, you'll feel like we do at Tree Action Seattle, that we need to do something, and we need to take action. Because if we don't stand up for our communities, the developers, outside interests, the money are going to take it from us. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention. And thank you for taking time to consider everything you've learned tonight.
Thank you, Ryan. Many folks here are already involved. So thank you very much for your involvement and for your time. Time only goes in one direction. And everybody has a choice in how to spend it. So we greatly appreciate your contribution here. But should you wish to get more involved, there are a few things you can do. First, you can join us at treeactionseattle.com. We actually just published a guide thanks to the aforementioned Iskra Johnson. Thank you very much. That's a candidate outreach guide, which has just like, even if you don't want to talk to candidates, you should read this guide because this is an amazing, just like how to network and talk to people, best practices guide that I plan to print out and share with all of my future interns that I ever have. So it is really great in general, but it's also really great for political involvement. There is as I think, is it like in the Environmental Defense Fund or Earth Justice has the slogan, "The Earth needs a good lawyer." Trees need a good lawyer, and the good thing is our trees have one, but lawyers are expensive. And so if there is anything at the bottom of your pocket to support the current legal action to transform the tree ordinance to live up to its name, that's also something. We'll share where you can do that on the next slide. And most of all, it's just about civic engagement. You know, it doesn't take very many people. It doesn't take, how many people vote in the primaries? How many people vote in the general election in an off year? I mean, it's like the number of people in a few high schools, a little bit more than that, but it's not very many people. And so a few really active folks can have an outsized influence, and now is the time to be doing that. I have a couple of stickers here. I think I meant to say that you can collect stickers over at the table. We've got some awesome stickers that Kevin helped to create. And then we also have a flyer that's an FAQ on the tree ordinance in case you want to learn more about policy. If you don't care about policy, that we still love you and that's good. You can come over and hang out with me because I'm not very good with policy, but if you do, then we have this really great flyer for you to learn more, and many, many smart policy folks here like Steve Zemke over there with the hood who can talk policy all day and night to you and help you get really, really informed. And with that, we just want to say thank you so much and take any questions, as well as invite you to connect with us in all these different places. Oh, do we have some question cards? Awesome. And we have some just hand raises, which is all good with me too. Actually, while we're getting the question cards up, may I invite this gentleman to come and ask a question or make a comment?
Kind of a comment. So when we moved into our place, which is, you can probably see from here, there was nothing on the property except for junipers. It was a juniper desert, I like to call it. My wife brought in a lot of trees. And since then, we've got a lot of birds and a lot of insects and things that we didn't have before. So it's been really a cool experience. But at the same time, there's a responsibility involved. We have a huge fir tree on the north side, and it's beautiful, but it just drops stuff all the time. So there's a management aspect. So when we have trees, when we have trees in the city, we have to manage them. And it's like children, you know, you have to manage them too, right? So.
Thank you. John, do we have the question cards? Otherwise, why don't we take John and then we'll go to Kathy has a card.
Hi, I just wanted to add on to Ryan's presentation. Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much, Ryan. Those were beautiful photos and a great story about Luma. But I just want to put a very fine point on the fact that if we had followed the law, Luma would be pieces of wood. Right? Direct action was stepping outside of the law and showing what is right. So thank you for the support in saving the trees.
Thank you, John.
I see lots of hands up out there, so I'll make this quick. Question is, are there studies on areas of tree canopy and the level of crime/violence, and are they related? In my awareness of that question, think about Jane Jacobs long ago, the urbanist, and how she talked about you create places where people want to be and there is less crime. And that is pretty much, that holds up. The work that I'm aware of centers on cities in the northeastern United States, and they tend to focus more on vacant lots. So cleaning up vacant lots, creating new parks, and crime rates go down. In terms of tree canopy, I'm not quite sure. I have a question. Who is David here who did these design sketches? Because I've been interacting with him for years and would love to talk to you in a bit. Thank you.
Kathy, can I just add one point on the crime question? There have been some more recent studies published since 2019-2020 that have shown that trees do indeed reduce crime. Interestingly, street trees don't reduce crime nearly as well as big trees on lots. Surprise, surprise, I couldn't have made up a better study myself, but that is literally what the data say. And interestingly, they reduce both violent crime and property crime. And it seems to be causal as opposed to simply correlated with richer neighborhoods. So there's a really great journal, a scientific journal called the Journal of Urban Forestry that publishes a lot of these studies. You can look up this one, I think is one of their more recent ones, and others. But for whoever asked that question, I'm happy to, it's like in my search history, and I'm happy to look it up for you.
I've got 3 questions here. Maybe I'll do one and then let someone ask one and trade off and see how much time we have. This is a good one. Are there any trees within the city limits that were not logged prior to the beginning of the city? Are any of them left standing? Well, we just heard about one, right? Luma? They do exist. There is, I would say, very, very, very few that are out in neighborhoods. If you want to see an undeniable pre-settlement tree in Seattle, go to Seward Park. Seward Park is going to be your best bet. See some big old Doug firs. The other place in the city would be Schmitz Park in West Seattle. It doesn't mean there's not a lot of great big trees to see, but those would be the 2 best places to go.
Thanks. I just wanted to make one mention of the talk about crime and urban birth rates and so on. There's another researcher like Kathy Wolf in Portland. His name is Jeffrey Donovan, and he works for the USDA and Fish and Wildlife. And if you just look up his name, you'll find all of his research on his website. It's all very, very interesting. I saw him at a tree conference in Portland earlier in the summer. And we can probably get him to come up in Seattle and give a very similar talk to what she's talking about. But all of it's on his site. Jeffrey Donovan is his name.
Thank you. Another one here. Will native trees survive climate change, warming planet, droughts? It's a big question, and I think there's multiple parts. One of it is trees in our neighborhoods. Trees in our yards, trees on our streets. I think that's a little bit different than our forests out in big landscapes. We know already that Seattle is as much as 17 degrees warmer than the Cascade foothills. We are already experiencing future climate scenarios. 17 degrees is much higher than any anticipated warming. So you can look today and see how much our red cedars are suffering and compare that to those in natural forests and get a sense of that difference. To me, I think, yes, we can keep those trees alive because we can do a lot to cool the city. We can do a lot to save trees that we're not doing right now. Their destiny is not preordained. We can make a big difference.
Hi, everybody. My name's Janet Way. I'm with Tree Pack. I'm in the spotlight here. And Tree Pack and Trees and People Coalition. And we are the group that is bringing the legal action to the city to fix the tree ordinance. And if you would like to help, we really do need your help. So you can go to seattleneedstrees.com and help us out by making a donation. It's really important right now, and we have a great attorney. This is challenging the fact that the new tree ordinance is not in compliance with Seattle's comprehensive plan, and that's what we're attempting to prove at the Growth Management Hearing Board. So it's kind of a lot of wonky stuff, but basically that's it. And we want to fix the tree ordinance and actually improve the canopy. So we'd appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. All right, well, it is 8:30, and we want to let folks get on with their evenings. As we kind of mentioned before, one of the highest impact things that you can do between now and November 7th is get involved. By the way, you don't have to be an eligible voter even to get involved. You can still donate to candidates. You can support them. You can go all the way to the finish line without towing the line. And I was just made aware that we actually have 2 city council candidates here in our midst, which is super cool. If you are a city council candidate, and by the way, Janet used to be on the Shoreline City Council, which is just a little shout out to her. That's how cool she is. But if you happen to be a city council candidate, will you please stand up and give us a little wave? Ron Davis, and is there... Oh, Kathy Moore was here and just left. Oh, darn. Okay, well, thank you for being here amidst your extremely busy schedules. And actually, everybody's got things to do, especially on a rainy night. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
Just wanted to mention to people also in terms of voting that Tree Pack has questionnaires on their website for all the city council candidates. 2 of them did not respond, but the rest of them did. And we have endorsed 4 candidates there. So just wanted to let you know. It's at treepack.org, also at the Don't Clear Cut Seattle website. Thank you.
We had an idea that maybe in case Ron, since you're still here, I don't know if you wanted to not to put you on the spot or anything, but I mean, it's kind of your job, right? To just be put on the spot and be a professional public speaker. If you might, I don't know, want to say a couple things about, your relationship with trees or why you're here, or just speak to the folks here.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was really informative and fun for me. I don't have deep policy experience when it comes to trees. I've been learning a lot, but I do know a few things. And one of the things I know is that something that you have said so many times tonight, and I've so appreciated, which is that trees and adequately addressing our housing issues are not incompatible. I love the term, I think it was Susan that you said about lot sprawl. That was such a great term. So I've been advocating for quite a while for much more limited lot coverage requirements. I think we can go up. There's German cities that are doing this now where they're saying you can't cover so much of your lot. We'll give you a few extra stories if you need it. We need to make sure we meet our housing needs, but we need to protect those trees, those mature trees that are on our lots. I also believe in the power of a healthy administrative capacity inside of our city. Our city needs to be the one investigating those trees on site, not outsourcing that to developers. As you said, the fox guarding the hen house. That's ridiculous. It's a bad set of incentives. We also need to be investing aggressively in maintaining our existing trees, which will take more administrative capacity. All this takes money. People don't like to spend money. And because of that, the Master Builders Association, the very people that have done so much to try to make it easier to cut down trees, has put over $100,000 into my opponent. So I am endorsed by Tree Pack and by a number of folks in this room. I'm not always going to be perfect, but I'm always going to be trying very hard to learn. And it's important to me to make sure that we have a city that is green, where we're expanding our tree canopy, where we're preserving our tree canopy. And I'm just so grateful to be here tonight and get to share that with you. Thank you. I'm in District 4, which is Northeast Seattle, including Wedgwood.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you so much, everyone, and have a great night.